The next speaker, Professor Yike Guo, leads the data mining department at the Parallel Computing Center at Imperial College in London, and is an expert in building cloud systems for large-scale scientific collaborative research. Please welcome Yike Guo. Welcome to the Brain Forum.
So science is observationary, right? And we already know from yesterday's speaker, take example of the Isaac Newton saw an apple drop to the floor and come with the theory of gravity. So obviously, he has a very brilliant brain. And but science is now still observationary. It's just the way we observe has changed quite a lot, as really due to the development of high throughput equipment. So it's allow us to observe more, observe deep. So one very good example is really the human genome sequencing. So now, right, one day we can actually sequence one human genome, and this thing we cannot see before, we cannot observe before, now become observable. Same thing with the brain. And we have the connectome projects, although we don't have the device which generates throughput like sequencing, but now we do have a device which actually can understand, can actually derive the point-wise neural connectivity and derive this big data. So the size is much, much bigger than the genome sequencing. So by understand the property of the physical object, by data measurements, and by really use a high throughput device to get those property measurements, I use a word called datafication. So let's come to the brain in particular. It's not big, as I said, it's 5% of human body or something. However, it's from the information point of view, the size is huge. So the datafication of the brain function is what is now we're all about to talking about the function screening or brain screening. So there are many technology. We heard about EEG, MEG, and then now fMRI. Taking fMRI as an example, we can discretize the brains into about 150,000 voxels, and this one will give you one snapshot of a brain activity. And then when we do the screening, it will take probably 2 minutes to one scan, and we usually take over 100 scans, and then you do many experiments and with many participants with many different conditions, so you can imagine how much data points will generate. But data points is not the whole story. You have to generate all the relationship between them. So therefore, the brain research is really a data-driven research. So this is the standard way of the data-driven research work. So I'm a data miner, so I really love this kind of big data thing. So, but let's look around a particular type of data with the fMRI function brain image. So we can see the evolution from small-scale research to big data, see how this is actually changed. So we started with really understand brain activation on the single vector level. This is a single vector level research. You give 2 stimuli here, and you try to find out which voxel is actually corresponding to this stimuli. So this research is done when we have the fMRI image facility first. And then we realize, although this is important, however, this kind of research don't really give you too much power of a prediction. So now you come to the level of so-called multivariant activation study or multi-voxel pattern analysis. So this is very similar with the biology. This you can think about as point-wise gene fold exchange detection. This is more like to do with you build up the actually gene expression profile. And then you can think about it. The cognition is really a network phenomena. So it's not just one neurons, couple neurons, it's really the connectivity. So you can't change the data type. So you not really use actually the voxel as a data input, but use the connectivity. So you take the RESTful study, understand the intrinsic property of the brain, and then you give a stimulation here to understand so-called connectivity patterns, right? So this is but you do it still, start with the small, and for example, you can here, you do like a seeded pairs. Basically, you concentrate on one voxels, which is probably active, and then look around all the possible connectivities from this point, and then check out the patterns related to the stimuli. But this is why you take 1 point, because if you take all the points, right, take about voxel is 150,000, and you take all the full points, full pairs, it will be over a billion instantly. But computer now can do it. So now you come to the real, the big data kind of analysis. You take all the pairs, right, and then use the patterns from all the pairs as the fingerprint for understanding the real, stimulation. So basically, you really don't care about a single voxel. You take the whole brain and you give the stimulation, and you can see the patterns, right, for multivoxels and how they behave differently. And then use this one to actually build a classification model to actually predicting from the brain's voxel activation to predict what kind of stimuli you actually give. So this is really sometimes people call the brain decoding or brain reading. The data mining technology is used a lot in the MVPA, and there's a lot of challenge and a lot of exciting work we can do. So one of the very important challenges here now is really this dimensionality. So you can imagine, right, we deal with about 150,000 voxels, so immediately is a huge sort of the data set. So one message, I'm not going into technical detail, but give you some simple technology we're using, is based on this so-called lasso methods. Basically, we turn these problems into optimization problems, which is find this beta, which is mentioned here, this beta, the coefficiency, and such that the output and the prediction error is minimized. The number one here now is we understand in order to get this problem, this message work, right, all the features or the voxels have to be somehow independent. It's not really the case in the brain, because the whole point of the brain works is emphasize on their connectivity, right, emphasize on their correlation. So therefore, you have to find a different message here and to actually really try to actually use the methods, but tackle this problem. So one way we're doing here now is we working on not a single stimuli. We form a task we call multitask prediction. So in this way, the output is not one label, it's many labels. In this way, you achieve two goals. You increase the sparseness, because not too many voxels actually can simultaneously actually responsible for this stimuli. And also another thing is also help to actually understand the common structure, common areas, which is related to multiple tasks. Connectivity is really an interesting thing, and we already heard in the previous speaker, everything is all about the research on the connectivity. We all know there are three levels of connectivity. One is a structure connectivity. This is really a biology-driven, right? Try to understand, right, the structure of the brain by understand the neural level connections. But then the next level is a functional connectivity, which is really come from the functional screening data and try to find out the dependency between neurons, statistical dependency. But it's not neuron this time now, it's voxels, which is one kind of the approximation of neural group. And then another one is effective connectivity. It's really coming from really the models. You have a cognitive model here, and you generate and then the causality between the neurons. And then use the experimental data to actually probably will do the parameter fitting and try to find out the model which can reflect certain causality between the neural connections. So from the analysis point of view, is really quite, there are many methods, right? But the idea is pretty much similar. So one thing is that you take a time series, you divide it into the windows. For each windows, you assign a conditional or experiment condition, and then you estimate, right, actually the connections, right? Either you do the statistical association or you fit the models, and you find out that the data fit with actually your assumption, or you find the optimal association. So this is the way working on. So the important thing here now go back to this prediction, brain reading, you can actually use right now the connections as input data, not really predicting the stimuli from actually the voxel reading, but coming from the all connections you derived. So the next part of my talk is not about analysis, it's about the data integration and also the management. So I also involved, as an introduction said to me, is I did a lot of work on the cloud, but most of the work I did cloud is for disease translational research. So one of the work which we are doing now is build software platforms for translational study. And brain disease is, of course, one of the important ones. So as we all heard today, very important thing for understand, for actually help the brain disease study is really you have a data integrated. So this is not just really the brain image data, but it's really to do with the patient, for example, molecular level data and the symptoms and also lifestyle as well as the monitoring their status related to disease. For example, EEG is one example we heard a lot today. So the key point here is how to put them all together. So one thing we are talking about use the big data is really treat them as a common architecture. That's why the cloud comes. So you can have big data storage systems where all this information can be put together. So here we're talking about of course, the brain image data, EEG data, but also we're talking about the other lifestyle monitoring, for example, the gait data, which is extremely important when you're talking about something like multiple sclerosis. It's not too much about EEG, and you really have to really understand the people's movement daily. So that is kind of research we're working on. This project is aiming for developing platform for 2 billion investment European Commission already made to build the so-called IMI, which is Innovative Medicine Initiative. So they actually found this project with so much money and generated tons of data. They don't really thought about where to put it, how to integrate. So this project is come to solve this problem. So the e-trick system is really based on one data warehouse technology called the Transmart, which I involved to build about 6 years ago. But we are still building it. It's an open source, it's a global efforts to build data warehouse for warehouse translational research, but mostly focus on the molecular profiling. But now we want to extend it much further to incorporate new data types, in this case, for example, the brain image, and also the clinical data extended, but more importantly, to incorporate actually the data collected for the daily health monitoring. We consider this is extremely important for many clinical study. So in order to extend it, we have to do a couple of things. One, we have to support different kind of analytical pipeline. And here we largely focus, for example, this MVPA study. The challenge come here is the middle. So in the transmart down before, because it's really down for the drug discovery, so we not pay too much attention on the longitudinal study and also the clinical monitoring of the human activity. So the data model have been extended to really introduce the time support and also introduced the so-called clinical data input, which is really not from hospital, but from the human daily activity monitoring. So this is a big one. The second one is you need to extend the ontology, the previous speaker already mentioned. I don't think this is well established in the brain disease area. So for MS, we just had ontology published weeks ago. So actually, to have a standard representations, standard terminology about about this disease, because without this, data integration is not going to work. So one of the example project we use it is really for this, it's called Optimal, for stratify therapies in multiple sclerosis. As you can see here, the data source coming from really, this is the protocol we actually use it to actually in this project. And if the measurements is all different, but you have to now put it in an integrated way into the database for integrated study. So we did a lot. Use the thinking data science is a tool for research and brain. The other way around, we can actually learn a lot from brain science to think about a new way to the data science. So this is the other way around. So it's very interesting to think about this comparison about brain networks and other networks we are dealing in the big data. One way we think about this one is human brain is really one big function is control the sensory systems we have. Right? So why not we actually taking this idea and apply it? There's many models researched already, and it's very interesting. So why not taking this one to develop a kind of operating systems for sensor network? So that's the idea coming. So what is it really? This means is we can think about brain as like an inference machine. They always have certain kind of model in their mind. Based on this model, actually they make prediction. And now you check prediction results and with observed data here, and then you, based on the sensation, and then you got to really do two things. One is you find the observation really the same with your data, you're happy, you ignore it. Or you take action, or to actually change the word or change your perception. So this is pretty much, but the key principle here now is make consistent. That's why the free energy. So it's a way to, say, reduce surprise. Okay, so you don't want to have your brain and every day you make a surprise, that means your model is pretty bad. And so that was the idea behind it. So this is actually quite interesting. We can apply this one to control the distributed sensor network. So this work we are doing and funded by EPSRC is really based on the cognition model to developing a sensor control system. The key idea here now is you have a model control for the sensors. And where to sense, when to sense, how much to sense is all driven by this idea of free energy. So this is one model we built to sense the environment. Right? You only sense it, and you have always model represented as a causality network, and you use this model to control, constantly to match with the observation. And then you only do works when you find out there is the deviations from observation with the model. So I will conclude my talk. I think the brain research from the data science point of view is really exciting. Small brain is really a best place for big data research. And the big data research also provide the key technology for really to understand our brain. Personally, I find this research is extremely exciting. The reason is not because of data is big or the task is complex, it's because it's extremely creative. So we are now using creativity given by our brain to understand the brain itself, how marvelous it is. So that is my talk. Thank you very much.